So day one of the 2025 NFL Draft is in the books. The Cardinals, Zach, make just the one selection. I have to make that clear because a year ago there were two selections in the first round. But the pick, Ole Miss defensive tackle Walter Nolen III, the 16th overall pick. We've had a chance to hear from him. We've had a chance to hear from both Monti Ossenfort and head coach Jonathan Gannon to get their thoughts on a disruptive presence along that defensive front.
You mentioned how there's only one pick this year, and Monti Ossenfort said it was a lot. It was pretty calm. The phones were not ringing nearly as much. He said that they were pretty quiet. And when you think back to his first year, Paris Johnson Jr., how he was able to move around the board, obviously you were wondering about Marvin Harrison Jr. Then towards the tail end of the draft, there was that countdown that they had on the flight plan where Monti Ossenfort was counting down the picks until Darius Robinson was there. So now they have their guy, and Jonathan Gannon said it was the number one guy on his board in Walter Nolen III.
Yeah, he called it, if it was going to be a perfect day as he got into his car, was that Walter Nolen was going to be an Arizona Cardinal, and that is the case here in 2025. Now, not to date, the gentleman on the line about to join us here on Cardinals Cover 2, presented by Hyundai, proud partner of the Arizona Cardinals. But back in the day, it was, 1994, Rob Fredrickson, the selection in the first round of the Arizona Cardinals, 9-year NFL veteran, joining us right now here on Cardinals Cover 2. Didn't mean to date you, Rob, but welcome. And then just your initial reaction as you're watching and the commissioner announces Walter Nolen is the selection at 16.
Yeah, it's awesome. I love that pick. I love Walter Nolen and what he can do for the Arizona Cardinals. I never thought he was going to be available at 16. All the talk I'd been hearing leading up to the draft was that Walter Nolen was climbing, and then, you started to see some picks go before him that were a little bit of head scratchers for me, like Grant, the big defensive tackle for Michigan. I didn't think he'd go that high. I didn't think McMillan, the wide receiver from Arizona, would go where he went. So all of a sudden now some players started to kind of come back to the Arizona Cardinals that I hadn't thought were going to be available. And Walter Nolen, for me, is just an exceptional pick. I mean, what he can do in terms of just being a disruptive force. He's a guy that lives on the offensive side of the line of scrimmage. He penetrates and he gets into the backfield quicker than most defensive tackles in this league. So I'm excited to see what he can do for the Arizona Cardinals.
Is it his hands, the pad level? What is it that makes him so disruptive? Because Jonathan Gannon and Monti Ossenfort, they were talking about how when they sat him down, the first thing they said to him was, what do we want to see from growth? And Walter Nolen said pad level. And then JG's like, yeah, we agree with that as well. But they were complimenting his hands and just the violence he plays with. Is that what stood out to you?
Well, I think it's that first step. It's the get off the ball. Some guys have it and some guys don't. Just the ability to time that snap and get off on the ball with purpose. And some players, they fit into offensive linemen. Walter Nolen, if you watch him on film, he gets on the edge and he penetrates and really causes a lot of disruption in the blocking schemes for offenses, both in the run game and in the pass game. So it's just that initial burst that, you either have it or you don't, and Walter Nolen really has it.
Listed as a defensive tackle, but we heard JG mention that he sees Nolen as someone that can play across the line of scrimmage. Again, watching Nolen on film on Saturdays, Rob, do you see the same thing?
Yeah, I do. I think he can be kicked out to a 5 technique on the offensive tackle. I love him in that 3 technique, though, an outside shade of the guard. You look at this defensive line now, and Darius Robinson's another guy that you can kind of move around on that interior defensive line. They got a lot of options. Calais Campbell, Dalvin Tomlinson, Darius Robinson, and now Nolen. I really like that combination. Oh, by the way, Dante Stills, I love that guy and what he can do. So there's a good problem that the Arizona Cardinals have right now. It's a lot of depth on that defensive line.
And, of course, there's also Justin Jones and Bilal Nichols and L.J. Collier, the guys that are also coming back from injury, being Jones and Nichols. And Jonathan Gannon said how excited he was to also be welcoming them back. Considering you've been in these position rooms, what can Walter Nolen learn from some of the veterans like Dalvin Tomlinson and Calais Campbell?
Well, I think it's just, number one, it's how to be a pro. And you hear that a lot tossed around, but when you get into the NFL, a lot of time is spent not on the practice field, but in the classroom and studying film and going over game plans and truly digging deep and understanding what your opponents do and what they want to accomplish and how we can counteract that. It's going to be the studying in the classroom and learning how to be a pro is going to be the biggest challenge for a lot of these rookies. And, Walter Nolen's going to have the benefit of having Calais Campbell, just the ultimate pro to learn from and to understudy and just to be around and absorb some of that knowledge that Calais has.
I was going to bring that up because I can't think of a better quote-unquote mentor, Rob, than someone like Calais Campbell, 18 years now, and all of a sudden here comes a rookie that, might battle for playing time, but at the same time also I think it could be a quote-unquote maybe a little bit of a passing of the torch, if you will.
Yeah, I think at this stage of the game, Calais isn't mad about anyone taking reps from him. I think he's okay with 30 to 35 snaps a game, and that's good. That's where he wants to be and where he is in this stage of his career. And Calais is, like I said, he's the ultimate pro. He's going to give every bit of knowledge that he has, and that Walter Nolen wants to receive, he will give it. And so that's just a great way of paying it back and paying it forward. And that's what makes Calais Campbell the pro that he is.
Rob, I'm going to ask you to put on your defensive coordinator cap on here. How do you divvy up the snap total with all these guys? I know you mentioned it's a good problem, but Walter Nolen is a 3-down defensive player.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting how they spread it out. I'll say this: if I put my defensive coordinator cap on, one thing I'm not doing with this defensive front, I'm not blitzing. Okay, honestly, the blueprint was the Philadelphia Eagles in the Super Bowl and what they did to the Kansas City Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes. They didn't need to blitz. They got enough pressure with their front four. I think this defense is looking a lot like that Philadelphia Eagles front, in that they're not going to have to blitz. They're not going to have to scheme pressure. They're going to bring it with the four guys that they bring. And so you're right, there's going to be a challenge there in terms of rotation and who plays and who doesn't. But I'd rather have that in training camp. I'd rather have competition at every position and, the best players play versus whoever's healthy plays. And we've had that for the last few years, and we all know how that story ends.
Getting back to Walter Nolen, the person and the player, Rob, we heard him talk in pre-draft interviews ahead of the draft that he wants to be the next Aaron Donald. We heard from him on a conference call, and he reiterated that he wants to be the next Aaron Donald. But hearing him say it, it didn't sound like it was cockiness or overconfidence. It's just how he believes in himself. But you hear a young player coming into the league and you aim high, and you can't get any higher than an Aaron Donald as far as a defensive lineman. But just hearing that from him about now you got to back it up.
Yeah, and I've heard a lot of comps for Aaron Donald and Ed Oliver for Walter Nolen. And I think that's just because of that get off and getting off the ball and penetrating. And, I like that he wants to be the next Aaron Donald. I think you should aspire to be like the greatest of all time. I think you should shoot for that. And, if he's able to accomplish what Jonathan Gannon and Monti Ossenfort think that he can do and have enough faith in him to draft him 16th overall, I think I think he has an opportunity to get to those levels and to do what what those guys did. And Walter Nolen, he's got a lot to learn, obviously, and it's going to be a learning curve, and there's going to be a process that he goes through. But I'm really excited based on what I've seen of him on film and heard from him in interviews. He sounds like a great guy, and I think he'll fit in really well in this locker room.
Rob, we're only a few hours removed from when he heard his name called. What do you think he's feeling now that the excitement has started to slow down a little bit? Maybe the draft party has calmed down a little bit, and then in the next coming days, he'll be walking into the facility for the first time as a member of the team. Considering you've gone through this yourself, what is going through his mind?
Yeah, no player will probably tell you this, but there's anxiety right now. There's nervousness. There's a lot of unanswered questions. It's just a ball of nerves because you don't know what to expect. You've never played in this league before, and you're going to get to your first mini camp, and guys are going to be flying around, and you've never seen the speed with which, especially like the offensive linemen relative to what they were in college. They're just faster. It's a faster game, and it takes a little time to adjust. Some guys do adjust quicker than others, but there's going to be a learning curve. There's going to be an adjustment period, and once you kind of get the helmet on and get out there and practice and get used to it, the nerves settle down, the butterflies go away, and you'll see Walter Nolen just kind of fit right in. But I promise you, right now, he's getting a little anxiety, getting a little nervous, getting a little butterflies in the stomach, wondering what's going to happen next.
By the way, Rob, Monti listened to you. You said way back when that you would not draft anyone that didn't put their hand in the dirt. So, again, I'm going to give you partial credit for this selection.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad he listened. I never thought Nolen would be available at 16. I really didn't. I thought we were going offensive line, but the guard from Alabama went higher than I thought he was going to go. I thought that would have been a natural pick, but I'm tickled to death. I'm excited about Walter Nolen. I really am. And again, this defense, in just the span of 2 years of drafts, this defense, I think, is shaping up to be one of the better defenses in the league.
Rob, appreciate the time, the insights, and we'll look forward to hearing more from you in the days and weeks to come, because it's going to be exciting to as we talked about, the competition now in that defensive line room.
Gotta get some rest tonight, guys. We got a big day tomorrow, too. Draft doesn't end.
Yeah, we do.
Appreciate it, Rob. That's Rob Fredrickson, former first-round pick back in 1994 and a former Arizona Cardinals linebacker. And hey, Zach, our first-round draft pick has arrived. Dani Sureck
just
joining
when you thought
us.
the draft was over.
How about that? Let's get the party started.
The 33rd pick in the 2025 NFL draft.
But the first pick in the Cardinals content draft.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, I should have come down here sooner. Keep going. Keep it coming.
All right. We'll get to what you've been doing all night long, conversations with both general manager Monti Ossenfort and head coach Jonathan Gannon, but just your initial reaction, your initial thoughts. Cardinals, again, prioritizing defense here in the offseason. They did it in free agency, now in the draft with Walter Nolen III.
I like this pick a lot. I like the position, and I like the player. This was a draft class that the depth and the star power was really on the defensive line and edge. And so that's where the Cardinals went, and I like that. I like that if you're going to take a swing on a defensive lineman, somebody who's going to be a menace in the trenches, more times than not, you got to use a high first-round pick on them. And yes, the Cardinals were middle of the pack, but this is typically where you get one of those long-time, game-changing defensive linemen. So I like the fact that the Cardinals went for it with their first-round pick. And this is a position room that relies heavily on rotation. This is a position room where the Cardinals battled a lot of injuries last season. So when you're looking at not just immediate relief, but depth throughout the season, depth moving forward, when there's a handful of players in that defensive line room right now who are only under contract through 2025 or don't have guaranteed money in 2026, this pick makes a lot of sense. Then you start looking at the qualities of Nolen as a player and as a person, and we know that the person comes first, the player second, with Ossenfort, the staff, and this organization. And so the fact that the Cardinals talked to Nolen at the Senior Bowl, at the Combine, and brought him in for a 30 visit tells you they got enough They heard and they saw enough for the type of player. And look, you guys heard it from his conference call. Walter Nolen is ready to get to work. He is already asking for the playbook. He is ready to come to the Valley and get things going. And I think that this brings a boost to this defense. That's clearly been the high priority this offseason when you're looking at acquisitions that have been made, right? A Calais Campbell, a Dalvin Tomlinson in that room. So the fact that they continue to beef up the D-line tells me the discussions we were having as a group on our podcast after the season about being better at stopping the run, those conversations were happening on the other side of the building, and they've done something about it.
So we were all on the right track, is what you're saying, right? We all knew what we thought were the issues that needed to be addressed. And I know, and it was something that was brought up in the post-day one draft presser was, and Monti brought it up, the injuries. You alluded to it as well, Dani, as far as last year. Well, it's been 2 years the defensive line has been hit with injuries. Yes, it's a great problem to have here with 11 now in that room. But we're talking here late April. I'm anxious to see what happens now in this remaining months before we get to training camp, and then September when the season rolls around, Zach, and figure out, all right, what do? You keeping 6? You keeping 7? Dare I say 8? And do we see a little bit of a different defensive look prior or before than what we hadn't seen in the first 2 years?
Certainly. Well, kudos to you both, because when you're at the Combine, that's when the conversation about Walter Nolen being projected and mocked to the Cardinals really started to become a thing, because we heard about the depth and how loaded this class was at edge rusher and defensive tackle. And now that all comes to fruition on Thursday with this draft pick of Walter Nolen, it's going to be very interesting. What does his addition mean to guys like L.J. Collier, to Dante Stills? They play a very similar role, that 3 technique, being able to be right in between the guard and the center. That was where Walter Nolen truly excelled, but Jonathan Gannon gave him his props and said he's able to play all along the defensive line. I question what Nick Rallis is going to be doing as he's trying to divvy up this snap total, because Walter Nolen does make a huge dent into what that snap total and that rotation is really going to look like.
You want to get better at a position, you bring in competition. Mm-hmm. So that is almost an embarrassment of riches, right? When you could have worse problems to have than having a lot of competition in that defensive line room. What I like about Nolen is his production at Ole Miss is not just in one facet. He called himself a unicorn, that he can do a little bit of everything, and his stats support that. In the middle of the pocket, he is clogging the gaps, and he's also able to get to the quarterback. 14 tackles for loss, 6.5 sacks. So that production has been there. Now it's just a matter of transferring that production from a college level into the pros.
Good against the run, good against the pass, and a good person first and foremost. I referenced your day, Dani, as far as your interviews, not only during the draft, but after the draft, but immediately after the 16th overall pick was made. GM Monti Ossenfort stepped out of the draft room. In your conversation, how about we hear what Monti had to tell you and the Bird Gang about Walter Nolen?
Monti, with the 16th pick, you go with defensive tackle Walter Nolen from Ole Miss. Why was he the right pick for this organization?
Yeah, Dani, Walter, he's played at a high level of competition. He started his career at Texas A&M. He was there for 2 years and then finished this past season at Ole Miss. So he's gone up against good players. He's a disruptive player. He's a 3-down player. He's good against the run. He's good against the pass. He's long. He plays with power, and he's a violent player. We had a good interactions with Walter both times, meeting him we actually met him at the Senior Bowl and then the Combine. Then brought him in here for a 30 visit and had good meetings with him all along the way. So really excited to add him to our defense and bring a disruptive presence as an interior rusher.
Beefing up the trenches, Monti, your 3rd draft, you make a life-changing call night 1. So to have that opportunity here tonight with Walter Nolen, you go back to the first one you made with Paris Johnson Jr., still just as special for you?
Yeah, Dani, it's one of the best parts of my job. I mean, it's a dream come true for these guys and for their families, and they put so much time and effort into that, and it really is a life-changing call and a life-changing opportunity. So just really excited to add good people and get them in here to our building, and can't wait to get Walter in here to meet the rest of the organization tomorrow.
Well, Monti, you're a busy man, so we'll let you head back into the draft room. Appreciate the time.
Thanks, Dani.
You can hear it in Monti's voice. Yeah, it's year 3, but picking up that phone to call whomever it is, whether that's the 1st round, 2nd, 3rd, 7th round selection, because it is life-changing. And I think Monti gets almost as much out of it as the person on the other end of the line, because their lives have just changed.
I actually asked Monti a little bit more about that when I had the opportunity to do a one-on-one sit-down interview with him after the first round had concluded. And I had asked him about why it's so important for him to tell the person on the other end of that line, because it's every player. It doesn't matter the position. It doesn't matter the pick number. Monti always tells the player, look around, tell your family and friends thank you. Thank you for supporting you. And that's really important for him as the person, and not just the general manager, but the person making those phone calls. And there are so many people who come from different walks of life. And this is such a unique opportunity that so few people have the opportunity to experience. And I think that says a lot about the type of person and therefore the type of leader that Monti Ossenfort is for this organization.
For all the talk about Walter Nolen and all these character concerns, he said that the Cardinals were the one team that just genuinely wanted to get to know him as a person. And JG said that's one of the reasons why he fell in love with Walter Nolen being his number one selection, because he got to meet the guy. He got to see the heart. And he was talking about how he's a little bit shy. And when you start to hear Walter Nolen say, I'm the next Aaron Donald, it's tough to believe that. But JG was telling us he's a little bit shy, but once you get to know him, he's this lovable guy. But there's something about him when he's able to turn on that switch and he's able to go into that violent, explosive defensive tackle. And in your conversation with Monti, Dani, he brought up the Senior Bowl. Think back to last year. Who stood out to the Cardinals at the Senior Bowl? It was Darius Robinson. So these pre-draft all-star games that these college players go to, they matter and they do make a difference.
Especially when the Cardinals have coaches on staffs of these all-star games. When you hear a coach say he was our number one guy, sometimes, when it's later on in the round, not at 16, but later, sometimes it's easy to think, okay, well, that's who was there. But that's not the case here, because when you look at the players and the talent that was still available at 16, other defensive linemen, edge players, offensive linemen, the board really fell in Arizona's favor. So the fact that they went with Nolen really does tell you he was top of their list.
To that point, JG post-draft press conference talking about Walter Nolen, quote, today, the perfect world was getting in my car and having Walter Nolen on the team, end quote. I mean, that, and again, you get that guy, Zach, at 16, where it certainly sounds like he was top 10, top 5 overall, not just as far as defensive players.
What does Ice Cube say? Today was a good day. Isn't that how the song goes? Today was a great day for the Arizona Cardinals, and he is going to make a difference. I'm excited to see Walter Nolen at minicamp, seeing how he's able to mesh with some of his teammates, because that is a loaded room, and I would love to be a fly on the wall there when you get to learn from some of the NFL's best, like a Calais Campbell.
That's the point I was just going to make, is we've talked after the Campbell signing of being a role model for players like Darius Robinson, even like an LJ Collier still, Dante still. So now you've got a rookie coming in who's going to learn from maybe one of the best leaders and somebody that can really show him the ropes. I mean, Walter Nolen is in a great position here.
I referenced JG. How about we hear more from the Cardinals head coach immediately after the selection was made? Again, walking out of the draft room and speaking with you, Dani.
Coach, what was the reaction in the draft room when you guys made the decision to go with Walter Nolen at pick 16?
A lot of excitement. Had a guy, we've had him pegged for a long time. Got to know him throughout the whole process. Our scouts did an unbelievable job on him, and just excited to add him to our squad.
Last season, the defensive tackle had 14 tackles for loss, 6.5 sacks. How did your defense get better with Nolen?
He's just a disruptive player in the run and pass game. So and he can play up and down the line. So he's going to come in here, he's going to put his head down, go to work, and help us win games.
JG, appreciates time. We'll let you get back in the draft room.
Appreciate it.
So between Monti and JG, I counted 3 times the word disruptive was used to describe Walter Nolen. And again, I don't think that's a word that you just throw out there unless it's something that, one, you truly believe, and then maybe first and foremost, first you saw it on tape, and then second of all, amongst your discussions with the scouts and your coaches, that, yes, he is not only disruptive in college, but we believe he can be disruptive here in the NFL.
That's what you want out of someone in the trenches. Not dirty, but you want him nasty. You want him to go, and you want him to make life difficult for an offensive lineman. You want him to tackle a running back for loss. You want him to get to the quarterback, and that is disruption. And that is something that this defensive line It was not their strong suit last season. Now, there were a lot of variables, right? A lot of injuries and as a whole, but the fact that the Cardinals have beefed up that room as much as they have this offseason, I am expecting it to be a very, very different level of output.
You want a dog on that defensive line, and it's just somebody that has that pit bull mentality of they're not going to stop at anybody or at anything. And throughout so many times, I mean, Dan, you come from the SEC where those double teams, they have no shame in double teaming some defensive linemen, especially those big body guys that are right above those center, the one technique, the three technique. And Walter Nolen just toyed around with those players and lived in opposing offenses' backfield. So when you now add that to the mix, somebody that has no issue getting their hand in the dirt and getting through the gap, they're going to take it any day of the week.
It's going to be fascinating how this plays out. There'll be plenty of time to discuss it in the coming days, weeks, and months. But I'm, again, just my initial reaction based off what has been done, what has been added, not only the defensive line, but outside linebacker. I'm thinking that this defense is going to look a lot different as far as personnel, how many defensive linemen you now see on the football field compared to how many times there were one or two or no one with their hand in the dirt. I think Nick Rallis now has the personnel, and with Jonathan Gannon going back to Philadelphia, where you could just have four guys rush at once and everyone else can drop back.
This was the expectation timing-wise. When you get a new staff and you get a new general manager, you're not going to be able to completely turn things around overnight. It takes time. And so year one was kind of figuring out the players that are going to be a best fit for this culture and for this team moving forward. And year two was about setting that foundation. And we saw that with 12 draft picks. And that's the best way to set a culture, is to bring in young players. So this is what they know. And so now you're in year three, and now you've got to go for it. And that's what these moves tell us when you look at the acquisitions throughout free agency and this first pick at 16 with Walter Nolen. So this is the trajectory that the Cardinals have been on, and they have focused a lot on offense the first few years. When you're looking at some of the big moves, there was a lot of consistency on that side of the ball this offseason. So now we've seen a big uptick in the attention to defense. And so I think that they are on the right track. And when you've got a defensive-minded head coach like you do in Gannon, I think a lot of damage could be done.
The continuity along the offense, you are adding so many pieces throughout the previous two seasons to that offense to completely make you look different. And now you need that continuity to turn into production. On the defensive side of the ball, you need to revamp a lot of different things. And that's exactly what the Cardinals have done by adding Josh Sweat, by adding all the players in the trenches we talk about. And you mentioned his ties back to Philadelphia. I mean, think about it. It was the Javon Hargraves, Fletcher Cox, Brandon Graham era where they had no problem where, like Rob was saying on the phone, he's not going to necessarily be blitzing that much because you want your defensive front to just be able to get by the offensive lineman and win those one-on-one battles. That is what this Cardinals defensive line is really starting to look like they're going to be able to accomplish.
All right, so real quick, what's next? With two picks coming up on Friday in the second round and third round, it's 47 and 78 respectively. Monti obviously very confident about where the board is at as they go into day two. I don't know if there's a certain position, but maybe you can look maybe at edge. And again, I'm big on adding to the defense, whether that's edge or cornerback or helping solidify the offensive line a little bit. But certainly, again, going back to how this offseason is played out, Dani, the Cardinals are in position to literally take the best player available regardless of position. We saw it here on day one, and I would not expect it to change day two or day three.
That's an ideal offseason, as you can show up for the draft and you don't feel pressured or forced to take a certain position. When you're looking at day two, rounds 2 and 3, the Cardinals had two picks, 47 and 78. Offensive line is still a need. Now, is there enough depth to where that is the right call at 47 or 78? I'm not sure. I think the safer bets will probably be edge and maybe wide receiver. I would not be surprised if they go edge at 47 and wide receiver at 78 just because there is so much talent at those positions.
I wouldn't be surprised if they go after an inside linebacker or like Carson Schlesinger, the linebacker from UCLA. He started to rise up a lot of draft boards. He was projected as a late day 2 pick, and then there were some conversations. And granted, now that the first round is concluded, to see how Jihad Campbell slid down the board all the way down to 31 at Philadelphia, the topic of conversation with Carson sliding into the first round now absolutely seems, very moot. So I wouldn't be surprised if they add somebody like him. There's also that cornerback, Will Johnson. He's still on the board. I know the injury is a cause of concern, but if you are willing to look by, or if you're willing to look past that and you feel like you did your due diligence, he is a player that was arguably a top 10 pick before the injuries started to become a thing. If you're going to look at offensive line, you have the offensive lineman from Arizona. I know I mentioned Jared Wilson from Georgia, the center. He's another player that you can move over to guard. So there are still some options for Monti, but I also wouldn't be surprised if they try to move up, early on in the second round, because there are a lot of good first-round grade players.
Well, we don't know for sure it was injury that kept cornerback Will Johnson out of the first round. If that is the case, look at what the Cardinals have done. They've drafted cornerback Garrett Williams, who entered the draft still recovering from a knee injury at Syracuse. They took a chance on wide receiver Michael Wilson, who had been nicked up at his time at Stanford, and those two picks have worked out. If that is the case of why Johnson slid out of the first round, that would make sense of if you're going to take a first-round pick for a player, right? You kind of want them to come in and be ready. And if teams maybe don't think that, again, we don't know. We don't have confirmation on any of that being the reason. I'm just saying if that is the case, the Cardinals have shown that they do a nice job doing their due diligence and taking a chance on the right type of players if that's the case.
Yeah, you can slow play when you have an injury based off what you already have in those particular rooms, and there's no need to throw that player in immediately. So, again, we'll have to wait and see, but a good first day, good work from everyone, including the two of you, both on and off camera. More on camera for Dani, but I know it's been a long day for everyone.
It's been fun, though. I appreciate you guys letting me hop on.
Hey, day one's now in the books. So let's get ready for day two.
You going to wear a nice suit on Friday and Saturday, Zach?
I do not know, but JG complimented my suit, so day was officially made.
A win-win for Zach Gershman. By the way, on this special edition of Cardinals Cover 2, we got the video. I need to shout out Alex Greenberg, which I failed to do in our first show, so special thanks to Alex. And as always, special thanks to our executive producer, Jim Almohandro, our associate producer, Cody Fincher. For Zach Gershman, Dani Sureck, I'm Craig Grialou. We'll talk to you next time here on Cardinals Cover 2.